Most people see food waste as solely a sustainability problem, but Flashfood saw this as a business opportunity. They've rerouted over 130 million pounds of food from landfills, and they've made it profitable for over 2,000 grocery stores. In this episode, I'm joined by Jordan Schenck, the CEO of Flashfood and the mastermind behind their 2024 rebrand. And we'll unpack how they built a model that works for shoppers, retailers, the bottom line, and of course, for the planet.
I learned pretty early on when you've got thousands of pounds of something and it needs to go somewhere, there isn't this perfect distribution network that exists to catch it all. Before it was we tell you it's climate. That's not finding the soul of the why. What happens in a lot of purpose-forward brands is oftentimes you forget that you're also working with consumers. The Cheeto decision is oh, I'm just gonna say that it's good for the planet because that's the fast win versus how do I create a community around it? A lot of newer brands forget that. You have to be cool first. It's the name of the game. People want to feel a part of something.
This episode unpacks how to reposition your purpose as value so it doesn't just sound good, but it actually sells. Stay tuned. If someone really cares about the connection between purpose and profits, why should they keep listening to the next 45 minutes?
So I'm someone that's worked in this space now for 10 years, and I have learned a lot in that time about the playbook of how you build purpose-founded, purpose-led organizations into sort of hyperscale to that of ones that raise hundreds of millions of dollars from venture capital all the way through to scaling, across the globe in terms of consumers engaging or eating or drinking or buying your brand. And so for folks listening, I think I've learned a lot of ways to get your business or a business into hyperscale and into the attention of where it needs to be. Because when you're operating on the for-profit side, the playbook is completely different as you build and grow.
So before joining Flashfood, you've worked with a number of brands who are in a purpose-driven business space. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So prior to Flashfood, immediately prior to Flashfood, I was a co-founder of a wellness beverage startup called Sunwing. We were one of the fastest growing businesses that was at the time, I would say, how many years ago now? Close my eyes and think about it. 5-6 years ago, getting to shelf, we went from pretty much e-com to Walmart, Target, et cetera. So that was an incredible time. We founded with the mission of connecting humanity to the power of plants. And we partnered not only with incredible influencers across health and wellness to co-create a number of products, and we also gave 5% of our proceeds back to the nonprofit organization of the choice of those individuals that we created with. And prior to that, I was the global head of marketing at Impossible Foods, where we took the product from launch all the way through to grocery scale. And so that was an incredible moment in the plant-based world where we galvanized this movement, brought to the forefront of culture, the conscious thinking around eating plants in a new way. And so I've always, in the past 10 years, just found myself at sort of nexus point of how do we create meaningful brands that do a lot of good for people's well-being, for communities, for health, for our planet, and also make money.
Right, because you can't you shouldn't be wanting to do one without the other. Both go hand in hand. How has working for a purpose-driven business influenced the way that you think about marketing and growth? Has your background always been in the purpose-driven space, or were you in traditional businesses beforehand?
Before I joined, I slipped over into the company operator side. I worked in across agencies. So whether it was a product development agency or an advertising agency, that was where I started my career out in New York City, working with brands like Equinox Gyms or Bud Light or JetBlue or Chipotle. So very big box in terms of the business, not wholly sort of bounded with the notion of being purpose driven as far as we define it. But I think in some ways, a lot of brands start with some form of heart and purpose because all brands come from if their founder, someone founded it at one point and there was a belief in it. And I think what I've found with the way we define a purpose brand, it's almost have you got the client, do you care about climate? Do you care about human well-being? Do you care about and all that? And that's sort of where we've almost like drawn this line and definition where I've always like looked at brands sort of as one holistically is like all brands have a purpose for existence. Like
Mm-hmm.
two, like just because you are good for the planet doesn't mean that like a consumer is going to care just because you are. And I think we've watched this space like become so competitive, so greenwash, so health wash, like whatever terminology you want to use, wellness wash,
Mm-hmm.
like it's always going to blow up in that way. And if you don't understand the truth and the purpose from the beginning, regardless of what you are, you don't stand a chance. So for me, like when I've built brands, I tend to not think, I think about the sort of important part of like what you do for the planet or people is really, really important, but that's not the heart of why you have to market something to someone because that's
Yeah.
just that's your reason in the door. It's not your reason for forever. Like there's so much
Mm-hmm.
more that goes into a business to like allow you to continue to have a seat at the customer's table. And just because you like signal good doesn't mean that
Virtue.
like, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
you're allowed to stay.
Right.
Yeah.
It's got to be, the value piece too, beyond
Yeah.
the virtue, of course. Was there a moment that made you realize how big the food waste problem was? Or can you talk about your journey into Flash Food?
Definitely. So being on the CPG side of things, once you start to learn the kind of alchemy of a grocery store, I learned pretty early on, and even in the days of Impossible, just the first thing I got kind of exposed to was just like how much waste naturally happens when you like don't plan correctly, like when you don't
Mm,
plan demand, when you don't plan supply, and that moment when you've got thousands of pounds of something and it needs to go somewhere, there isn't this like perfect distribution network that exists to like catch it all. And that's like the nature of grocery, you
mm-hmm.
see some at one point we were saying 40%. I think they're saying like sort of mid 30% of things that are find them, in a grocery store finds its way to a landfill with a huge portion of that being fresh. And I just having been in the fresh grocery business would see that and like you see it. Like I think the first like you'll hear a lot of people get kind of they get woken up to it because like if you see what the back of a grocery store looks like, you're like, wow, that's a lot of food going out. Or if you're a supplier and you have an issue with your demand planning, you got a warehouse full of stuff, you see, like literally
Mm,
see in that warehouse, like, how am I going to move? Where am I going to put all of this product that I've got? And so that was sort of like the actual living of it, whether it was like as a founder or as someone who was on the team that was supposed to like figure out how to get demand, perfect and what have you, like impossible. Like you just like you see it. And then you get the call
yeah.
of like, what are we gonna do with it? And
It makes
it's
it very real when you have to see it, physically see it, not just stats,
you
I'm
hear the
sure.
number and like I don't think people genuinely put it together. Like 30% is like it's like tons. Everyone's like, I don't really get what a ton is. And it's like almost 2,000 pounds. So like do the math there. And like people can't like fathom the size of like state covered in like food that could have been edible, could have been eaten. And then
The size of a state, that really puts it into perspective in terms of like visualizing it.
it could be the size of a state. I don't know what state, but it definitely is. I used to say the size of football fields. And I've always asked us to do the math of like, what's the circumference of it? And my team is always like, food has so many different sizes. Like, I'm like, well, find the
Like, how
average
are you
size
going
of
to
food.
average it? Yeah.
Yeah. Look, someone call me crazy, but I know it's a lot. And I'm just like, I bet you we could fill like an entire bay of some state and be like, this is exactly where the waste would go. But it's enormous. And it's in some ways really heartbreaking because we forget how much goes into like creating an
Hmm.
apple or a pack of ground beef. Like, the amount of like material inputs, labor inputs that just the material inputs are like the feed or the fertilizer or the water or like the ground itself. It's like we sort of underestimate the magnitude of that, like call it trillions of pounds actually has so much more behind it. Like the CO2 that needs to go into the air. Like there's so much around waste that the sheer magnitude and the halo of it
Mm.
is really exponential. And it's where you hear a lot of things where the waste that we, the output, the CO2 output of the waste that we put in the world is like, it eclipses that of the entire transportation industry. Like, it's just like waste in and of itself is sort of your number one contributor to sort of overall, whether
Mm.
it's climate change and all of those pieces. But yeah, it's pretty profound. It's also like as a consumer, pretty exhausting to like hear it because you're just one human in this sort of like
In this
sea of,
vast
yeah, big
system, this
numbers.
vast.
So Yeah, I mean, that's the world of it.
Yeah, and I'm sure like having to be behind the scenes and physically seeing it, it gives you a whole different perspective. It's not like the everyday person. We just hear the stats, but we're having a hard time visualizing what that means. But you know, the imagery that she gave, you could probably fill a bay or even like several football fields. That's pretty
Way
vivid.
more than football fields. I mean, you could fill every single football field and probably the entirety of the United States. And like
Mm.
Esther is listening, and I'm like, Esther, we should actually find that and like draw that stat out of what it looks like. We've talked about it a
Hmm.
lot over time. We used to do that at Impossible with the amount of water that was used to produce beef in our country. Like you could fill the entire San Francisco Bay every day.
Just for like beef production. Yeah,
Yeah, just for
it's
water.
insane.
And so we just we forget about it because the system is so big and like only one human is,
Hmm.
you're a human in it. I think what was interesting in the pandemic, and I don't know if you've experienced this or like maybe even have like a garden, like I do think people have gotten closer to making food. Where like I just saw this
Mm.
other article that came out today about with the egg price issue in
Yes.
North America, people are like raising chickens more than ever before. And now people are like, wait, but chickens aren't good neighbors. And so, but I do think in all of that, like people are starting to see the like physically experience a bit more like the labor and the work,
Hmm.
materials and everything that goes into making food that I think we departed from for a little bit. And I do think you've seen that consciousness
Hmm.
of people thinking about waste. Those two trends have sort of set. They've coincided with each other because folks have thought about food more
Hmm.
in really unique ways than we maybe
Absolutely.
did in some of the previous decades.
Recently saw a post on social media. I think it was Morning Brew reporting that people are talking about buying fertilized eggs from Trader Joe's and trying to raise them on their own and seeing the debates in the comments. But I think these are things
Exactly.
that we're so removed from.
But good on them. They'll go on their journey and it'll work, or their neighbors will, vote them out of the homeowners association. I don't know. They'll figure it out.
Speaking with your colleague Esther, she was sharing that writing off food waste is typically part of the business model for grocery stores. So, do grocery stores, in your experience, typically see this as an issue that they're looking for a solution for? Or is it kind of like this is the cost of doing business? What are those conversations like when you're getting them to adapt to a solution like flash food?
I think oftentimes we forget with businesses, like there's people in businesses. And I would say all people that I come across do not like waste.
Hmm.
I think it's also one of those like bipartisan things that most people can agree on. Like it is one that like not everyone's like, yeah, we should throw things out. Like I don't think anyone's even like ran on that political slate quite yet, but could
Funny
happen.
you say yet. Hopefully
Yeah,
never.
not that we know of yet, but like that's something that I think by and large folks will always
Hmm.
they do align on, like they believe in it. Whether or not it is a priority within a business, within businesses, and especially within grocery businesses, which are extremely narrow margin, truly extremely like people oftentimes also think like a grocer, fat cat businesses. And it's like, no, like these businesses are inherently dealing with like crazy amounts of like velocity, lots of
Hmm.
dynamic products. They're at the whims of consumer demands. They're at the whims oftentimes of their like the government decisions that are happening. And they're at the whims of weather. Like there's all these things that go into like this store that you just like the rank order oftentimes of like what happens end of life is it doesn't sit at the forefront of it. And at the end of the day, businesses are designed to sell, not to sort of mitigate sort of the end of life stuff. So the answer is yes, it gets built into the business model. No, I don't think that anyone wants that to be in the business model. I think what's happened historically is there haven't been easy solutions. I think historically a lot of the food had always, sort of moved through the donation systems was one, but even the
Right.
amount of waste that's produced, I just was looking at the data from it was like a refed and a waste 360 report. And the number was like, donations even of total waste will only account for like sub 10% of what's available. And
Hmm.
that's not because the grocery store can't give it all, but like in the sheer volume and logistics of like what happens with waste, like it's just like there's no supply chain set up to like catch it. So and then they'll do their sort of like other programs where they're donating it to animal feed. Like a lot of wasted food will go to animal feed today. A lot of it goes to like just straight the incinerator because the landfill like won't even take it, or the landfills like you know everything has like a sequencing, right? Like it's not 100% guaranteed that like you're going to be able to like trash everything.
Mm.
We often forget that. Like they have businesses to run too. And sometimes
Yeah.
it's like, it's
They
full.
can't accept what you have. Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll find that like stuff does get wasted. There weren't a lot of tools, whether that was on the planning and demand side of it to make sure that like shelving was right. And then there weren't a lot of end of life tools. Like end of life has always been kind of historically in the realm of like scrap it, try to convert it to like feed or fuel, try to donate it to the varying community food banks. And there wasn't the options of like, hey, you could actually recuperate cost on the bottom line. Like you could still have the option of like, after all this was done and you still have tons of food, like there's still more places to move food. And so that's where folks like us came into the equation, where we've been able to sort of answer an additional end of life option for retailers that actually drives people in the store. So like with our model, we'll use the produce box, for example, can build a produce box, pick and pack, like pick kind of whatever's in the back that's like literally about to go out, whether it's because you didn't sell the last 5 apples sitting on the shelf or you've got another lot coming in, you got to move it. They'll oftentimes build that box and then they list that on our platform and someone comes in store. And so they don't full cart, but they're able to finish shopping in the grocery store.
I see. So initially, Flashfood started as a food waste solution. So you mentioned some of the end of life solutions that were available, but would a grocery store have the opportunity to bring in revenue from those solutions? I know you mentioned the donations or even landfills, but these are just
those don't bring. The only thing that those would typically save them is the cost of scrapping something.
okay.
Because like throwing something away actually also costs money. It does. It's not free to you. You want to throw away a ton of spinach, you got to pay someone to do it.
You got to put it somewhere and then somebody has to physically do it for you.
So scrap, like that, they'll get the cost of scrap saved, like the cost of it. So food waste and end of life are the same. Like that's just what it is. Like food that's going to waste is food that's usually has neared its best buy or sort of in the merchandising schematic. And what's unique about places like grocery stores, and you've been to them, like you want to have big, beautiful, full, bountiful shelves. Like it is actually like we merchandise in a grocery store for like bounty and beauty so that you will buy it. But the way that things all work is like, that's not real. Like that's not how real food is. Like food isn't always big and beautiful and bountiful. And as a day goes by, people are going to pick
always
the
full,
and
right?
drop them all. Like there's just like things like people are going to touch it. They're going to engage it. I'm sure you've walked past like in a grocery store and seen like, when a shelf gets kind of picked over and there's maybe like 3 things left. Those things are probably perfectly good, but your brain's like,
we don't want the leftovers. Yep.
Yeah, no, on the leftovers. So that's like actually what the most of food waste is. And at times, like it's that sort of the way that we've conditioned people to engage with the food on the upfront and the way that we like want to merchandise and have plentiful, bountiful sort of expressions in a grocery store tend to create like really interesting challenges in terms of like what gets thrown away. And then there's also the general requirement of like Best Buy dates. One, like Refund has a data point that like Best Buy dates contribute to like 48% of total waste. We're adhering to dates that are to what some policy has been bringing forward are like, they're very generally set, very broadly set, very sort of like broadly to the extent where it's like inconsistent because not all food is created equal. And I'm sure you also exist in the world of like sniff testing, like most people do. Like a lot of folks run stuff, like you're not paying attention to Best Buy as much as soon as it gets in your fridge. You're like, oh, that cheese looks weird, or oh, that milk smells bad, or like, oh, the apple side that got a little weird went a little further than it should have. Grocery store has to think about all that and the Best Buy and then like make sure that you want to buy it. So that's the trick of it all.
And all of those play a factor.
It does play a factor, and it creates this realm of like when time is inconsistent. So it's hard to predict when a pack of berries decides to spoil. You could do your best, but sometimes it's just like there was a spore in the air, then it went. And that day they were like all available to sell. And unfortunately on that day, you didn't have your donation or your feed pickup, and it's just going to the trash. And like it was just one berry in there set the whole pack aflame from being able to be sold. sold. And a lot of places in grocery store, like if one egg breaks, they can't sell that pack.
Because what are you going to do? Shift all the eggs of all the other containers? No.
That just takes too much money and time. It's
And time.
faster.
Yeah, I see. Yeah. If you're really setting the stage of how volatile, the grocery space is, especially when it comes to fresh food, I think this gives a really, really great context. So Flash Food was initially food waste solution, but you've kind of repositioned the brand to also focus on food security and affordability. Can you talk about what sparked that change and
Yeah.
if there were any challenges in making that shift and how you communicated your message?
We're a two-sided marketplace. We partner with grocery retailers and then we sell to consumers.
Mhm.
At our core, we are still a food waste. We are a food waste solution for grocery retailers. And for consumers, we're a place where you can buy what we call the Goldilocks window of food, which is like perfectly priced, perfectly ready to eat. And like that's what we are to consumers, which the outcome of it is obviously accessibility. And we're one of the only products out there that sort of better than commodity good prices, even on their best discount day. Like that's a real part of access. And so when in our repositioning, it was less about sort of the altruistic, you must buy this to save the planet, and more so about the like, buy this so you can maximize what goes on your family's table. And like, frankly, dollars back in your pocket probably means that you're maximizing your life. Like, and that's a much more, it's the truer place of where the brand exists. This is sort of where I was getting at. When you're building brands that are good, it's very easy to naturally say like, hey, we're a climate brand.
Mm-hmm.
Like it feels right. It feels good. It's like why it started is because we cared about that problem. That's not why like a consumer might care or believe in you. And I think for us, it required us listening to why our customers shop with us. And that came down to like doing the research, obviously, that you would do to position, but also just reading what the positive, this business is one of the only businesses that I've ever worked with where you're going to get like hundreds of positive feedback for like unfiltered. Like, I don't know if you've ever reached out to a brand and been like, thank you for existing, like going into their like, hello at this brand. This happens to be one of those brands that gets that. And so for us, like, that's interesting. Like, you ask yourself the question, like, why? And when you start to dig into it, people are like, not only have I been able to buy healthy produce, like healthy vegetables, meat, dairy, and people are like, I saved like $1,500 this year. And you hear these stories of people like, I fixed my car, I got more school supplies for my kids. Like for a lot of folks, and I would say anyone, I think anyone's pretty, I don't know anyone that I even know that wouldn't be like, wow, that's like a meaningful amount these days just because of how tight everyone's budgets has gotten.
Mm-hmm.
More so and sort of across any like demographic. But that was the repositioning for it, was like just finding the actual truth of the value of what we bring and then positioning from there. So it wasn't ever walking away from
the initial food waste thing.
Yeah, like it was actually unearthing the true outcome of what happens when you shop with the platform versus before where it was like, we tell you it's climate. That's not the soul, like that's not finding the soul of the why. And I think a lot of what happens in a lot of purpose forward brands is oftentimes like you forget that you're also working with consumers.
Mm-hmm.
It's very easy to be on the horse that's very high up and you're like, all right, like we're
solving
care
this huge problem.
We care as super smart people at the business and like we're doing great. And then you're like, right, but that's not what kept that person with you for a long time. It got them in the door. You owe them sort of more than like, solving climate change or human health. Like you actually have to do the work. You have to listen. You have to build. And there's a place for your brand there and all of it. But that's the why we repositioned. But it was for a much more truer and authentic place that the brand could exist.
Mm-hmm. And it's a really important distinction because the do good or the purpose, that's not why people keep coming back and buying. There's a day-to-day value that they're experiencing, and then the sustainability piece or the climate piece or the social impact piece, whatever it is, those are add-ons if it's not a direct benefit to their life. Because we're all thinking about how can we make, our individual lives easier.
And I think what a lot of newer brands forget that. I'll brands that I've either worked with or positioned, like you have to be cool first.
Right.
Like it's just kind of like It's the name of the game. It's how humans work. You have to feel cool because people want to feel a part of something. Like Patagonia, incredible climate brand, still built really cool products, like really good products. And yes, they let their ethos go into it, but the brand in and of itself was cool. It
Mhm.
was cool down to the fact that like even the employees could take off a Friday if they wanted to like go surf or hike. It was an effective purpose driven brand because it was cool.
Mhm.
That was huge. I think we forget and like pull yourself out of again the like world of we want to like create climate brands. Same thing, like we hear a lot about the brand like Liquid Death. Liquid Death is a climate brand. It is trying to not put plastic in the world, but it
Mhm.
did not care about that. It was like, let's make this cool. Let's figure out the community and make it cool and create content and all this stuff that isn't like hitting folks over the head on
Do
sort of,
better. Save the planet because it's so heavy, right? And it can be so dreary. It can
yeah.
be. They make it light and fun and approachable.
People have never purchased for a very long time because it felt like a bummer. Then you
Mhm.
make one out of them because it's like, here's my change kind of like feeling, but like,
Guilt tripped. Yeah. I was like,
yeah,
because I feel like I should.
yeah, but it's not what's going to create the endurance. And a lot of times when I used to work in branding, I would be like, okay, what's the decision where you're getting your calories from Cheetos? Or are you going to get your calories from like a whole meal? A Cheeto decision is like, oh, I'm just going to say that it's good for the planet because
Mm.
that's the fast win. It's going to make you feel momentarily full, but it won't make that person feel whole versus like, how do I create the community around it, the programming, the content, the world of what I want to do? How do I show people what that world feels like? What's the tone? What are the things that I need to do within my business? And then how do I not like tell them that the only reason they believe in this is because of climate? That's the hard thing to do. That's the meal, right? But people
Mhm.
come in and they like try to circumvent it and like just eat Cheetos, give people like the Cheeto for their calorie. Like it's kind of like,
Mhm.
it's a thing I take time and again with climate brands.
Right. It's something about I really like what you brought up about the listening to the feedback that you were getting because you came in with a solution, but through the feedback you discovered there was so much more as to why they stayed. Because it wasn't just about, we believe in having less waste. I'm talking about from the grocery perspective, right?
Yeah.
It's a little bit more than that, than the waste issue. It's also how is this going to be supporting their business too. So it's that listening piece where you start with one thing, but you realize that you're actually solving quite a few things. I think that's a really important piece too. How do you balance the need for the purpose storytelling and then also making sure that Flash Food drives the business results for your customers too?
I'm thinking on like a tactic front. We don't say, okay, now is the moment when we're doing purpose storytelling versus like now is the moment when we're driving value for our customers. For us, it's like we'll focus on creating what's interesting for like the here and now, if that makes sense. So like I think there isn't this like clean division line in terms of like purpose
Mm,
versus not. It's sort of always there and ever present. I mean, there are things that we naturally do as a business, like tactically, like assuring that we have an annual impact report that does like give us the ability to like generate sort of consistent data. There's natural cycles in a calendar year for grocers when we're looking at health and nutrition more, we're looking at certain things that will pull it forward, which would be when we'd over index probably on more purpose led messaging. But in sort of the throughout of it, we just like we're just sort of like running operations. Like for us, like a story that's going to go more viral is probably going to be about what someone did with like the 10 pounds of mushrooms they bought. Like that's going to make the business more interesting. The outcome is like we get all this great stuff, but like the second you start throwing like trying to jam in like messaging that's not just in the spirit of fun is the second you'll like not allow the sort of
mm.
the fun, like you kind of you brought the rain, like you brought it. Now it's like, oh gosh, let's talk about
Something
why this,
serious.
yeah, like now this is like what it's doing and like it's not fun anymore. And so I think we try to keep it here and then use the moments where it's maybe a little bit more like the purpose can sort of find itself out there a bit more with the right audiences versus like
Mm.
throwing it, like sort of slamming it into all consumer communications.
Right. So what are the things that your grocery store partners care about the most? What are the things that impact their buying decisions?
Their buying decisions, I mean, for them, grocers want to move the needle on their business. They want to sell the products that are in the store. Like you want to sell what is available at the prices that you know, negotiated with the brands, and the brands would want the same thing too, like the CPGs and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
That will always be number one. And then the operations, the general operations of their business, like, you know, how many folks are employed, how much, you know, how many of the logistics that went into the ordering, the shipping, the storage, like that's always going to be their number two, which is, you know, sort of where you see the dynamics of the world split between like merchandising and operations are like the driving forces. And sometimes one is more important than the other, depending on like where we're at. You know, I think in the COVID times, it was the first time that folks really like learned a little bit about like how the grocery store worked. And it was like a very, I mean, we were going to the grocery stores for entertainment. So grocery stores were like making more money than ever. Like things were getting sold. And then like after the sort of pandemic came to wrap, it became tougher. Like all of those assumptions around that foot traffic, those sales, like it wasn't there anymore. So like you had to drive up the operation side of it. Okay, like did we buy, like, where did we buy too many products? Where does it take too much time to stock? Maybe that actually doesn't sell in a post-COVID world. Like, so you'll see that dynamic play, and that's always like 1 and 2 for them. And then you'll start to look at like in the realm of operations and marketing, you'll start to look at other like things like shrink, which is what they call waste, is one part of the equation of all of it, right? Because like I was sharing with you, like food waste has, like anything, like food is not just food. It's the labor that went to get it on the shelf. For the grocery store, food is also not food. It's the labor to get it on the shelf, off the shelf, scrap it, like manage it, track it. Like these little boxes or apples we see are like almost like, you know, they're kind of like little celebrities and icons in there, right? Like, and they've got this whole team around them, making them like really fabulous and glamorous. And like, we all forget about like, what is the cost of it is all of that around it. And so that's like, but that is like the rank of where the grocery store will always orient. It's just depending on what time. And like right now you've got, you know, this realm of tariffs going on. Grocery stores are thinking on a couple of fronts, like, are people going to be buying less and going to the store less? Are they going to buy more bulk because they're going to be more price conscious? What do I have to do from how I sell this? Like, do I have to like have my pricing everything right? And then also, what do I have to do in operations to like take the burden of the fact that like this is going to start to erode into my margin? Like they're actually having this forcing function of having to deal with both simultaneously, which is really hard in grocery. They're just a hair above break even.
I was just going to comment on that. You mentioned that the margins are so slim in grocery stores. You know, thinking about the announcement on the tariffs for imports, like I'm sure this is going to hit hard very quickly, especially for high turnover industries like groceries.
Yeah. I mean, it's forcing a lot of dialogue, and it's a top of mind conversation. I will say though, in grocery, like there's always going to be something that's a top of mind conversation that folks are working with, because like, just like we learned in the pandemic times, like the front line is our grocery store. Like it is truly like, it's always been the heart of the community. It is the center of like most of our days. And like, so I say that with like, yes, they're working through like this current moment in time, but in grocery, there's always something happening in the moment of time because it's food. Like, it's just like, it's what's going on with food. And sometimes there's bad weather years, right? Like there are years where you have blights. Like there are things that happen that will continuously sort of always be at the forefront of a grocer's mind.
You've seen firsthand how customers shop, working so closely with grocery stores. So I know that Flashfood accepts government assistance programs as well. What are some big misconceptions that people have about buying habits?
So we accept SNAP and EBT. So that for not all of our grocers, it really depends on if the grocer, one, has to accept SNAP and EBT itself, and two, you have to, the way the system is designed, like you have to effectively have that grocery store is sponsor the ability for us to like carry it through. Like they have to pull there's a lot of bureaucracy around assistance programs, which we all know and feel. We are half off. So if you're getting the allotment within your, given period, we can take what you've got and like make it 50% more valuable, which gives you access to more food, super high quality food. And we were one of the first actually in the tech space to do it, sort of long before some of the big superstar Instacart businesses did. But that was just because in our ethos, that was always going to be something that we were going to bring on.
That was
and
amazing.
Then I think one thing that's interesting about, we can talk about the broader community of shopping habits, but specifically people who are on assistance programs or fixed incomes. A lot of people are on assistance programs. I think that's the answer in general, because it's not often like something that people are going to bring up in a conversation. You don't like, I don't say, hey, how's your day going? How do you pay for your groceries? Like, it's just not like that. We might ask each other about our jobs or our families or life, but we're not like, a normal flow is not like how do you pay your bills? Like, that's just, we don't know.
Right.
So then you don't often spend a lot of time knowing who's on an assistance program. And like the general answer is there are a lot of folks on it, and a lot more folks would realize, like your teacher, your doctor, your student are there in that community. And it's not often something that it's also something you realize in terms of like the communities that are receiving food where they're going to like bank or donation there. It's very, very vast swaths of people, which is why it was important for us to make sure that we had that as a representative part of our processing. In terms of general purchasing trends that we're seeing, I mean, there's so many ways to answer that question. And I am by no means like Nielsen or Circana in terms of like, I swear
That's okay.
Yeah, I go to I go to a different thing every month where there is like new data that comes forward, how this generation shops. Something amazing that I'm learning and even observing, like Generation Z is not a bulk buy generation, but they're also what you would consider like a eat it all generation, but they buy quality. So like, whereas folks that were millennial, we still have the like tail end of like buy a lot of stuff, but like don't focus on the high quality stuff. Like, we still believe like quantity equals awesome versus like Gen Z's like quality is better. So don't buy a bunch of stuff. And that like dynamic in and of itself is like really, really unique in a grocery store. Because what
That's
it'll mean is
fascinating.
like, if a Gen Z gets like, whether it's their allowance or like their income from their job, they would rather buy like a $10 interesting weird beverage and like drink it all versus like go walk like another like aisle of like apples and bananas and buy a bunch of fruit and maybe only eat half of it. Because grocery stores will also plan for people to buy in excess and like grab and pack. Z does not do that, which is fascinating
That's okay.
Yeah, like they're actually a lot more conscious in this sort of obscure way about food waste. So the intention is not food waste. It's actually like kind of like hype cycle. Like, did you get the interesting thing that's available? It's probably going to cost a little bit more.
So plan your budget accordingly. Yeah, just thinking about how that impacts, the planning cycles for stores based on who their primary
They're like, I
customers
don't
are.
even know how to. They're like, I don't even know how to. That's like the whole thing right now. They're like, whoa, well, but we've still got a lot of people, whether it's like some of the boomer communities, X communities that are like obviously huge. You're not You've also got another really interesting thing happening in grocery with some of your, like, you've got a huge technological divide. Like, you've got people who are literally digital native and people who are still alive from the time before the computers became into existence. At a grocery store, like, there's a world where, like, if you over tech, you sort of ostracize a base of folks who aren't experienced
there yet.
Yeah. And then if you under tag, then you're like not cool. I think you've probably most experienced it when you see sort of the relationship that people have with self-checkout.
Yes, they love it or they absolutely hate it.
Yeah. And that's kind of but the reality is it still shows you sort of the divide in how people feel about technology as a whole, especially in the grocery store. And it's still like a living experiment. And this thing, self-checkout came out years ago.
Right.
Over like 10 to 15 years ago. Like, it's been around and we're still like, we don't know.
Even with all the new developments with AI automations or just self processes, whether it be self check-in to a hotel or checking yourself out of the store, we're still kind of divided on whether we like it or not, or whether we can actually, as a population, do it successfully on our own.
Yeah. So for someone like us, we think a lot about that because we're app-based, right? We will at some point within the year, at the beginning of the next, launch a web-based version because there are a lot of folks that struggle to use apps still. Full stop. Phones are also really challenging device. Like, there's still like challenging devices at times if just like seeing, hearing, like there are real issues that come with like the size of a device and being able to engage with it for folks that when you're working with accessibility. So the pandemic shifted a lot of things in a really interesting way for shoppers, in that people before were not comfortable buying groceries if they physically weren't doing that.
Yeah.
And now there's some stores out there that they're seeing like 40% of their sales are coming from e-commerce. Like, it could have gone from like 2%. And like within just a matter of a few years, like depending on the region they're in and the community that they're around, but like that's changed radically. Like our relationship with like someone we don't know shopping for our groceries has changed radically. And so,
Especially for the produce, because I even experience this when I do like a grocery delivery. It's like, are they going to get the red and juicy tomatoes? Are they going to get me, the green ones or the ones that aren't to my standards?
the trick is you have to get into the chat when they're shopping and then just like kind of check it, especially on the tomatoes.
If they don't have the good tomatoes, leave them there. You got to text them, let them know.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about zero waste. What does that look like for grocery stores? How are they able to achieve it? And how does Flash Food play into that?
We joke a lot here. Well, what happens if the grocers get to zero waste? You're out of business. And I'm like, I really would be so happy for that day to happen, because in like the sort of, again, altruistic part of like why I've always me personally have wanted to work at these companies, I'm like, prove it. Let's do it. Like, let's do it. Like, we can actually do it. That means we've for once like done something to change this. Like,
Not for once.
yeah. Well, for once, truly, like we've done something that like actually changed the planet. That would be wild to be that successful. Grocery stores will get to zero waste on the front of the planning cycle is going to be one of it, which I think there's a lot of incredible innovation happening, especially with the sort of incoming realities of AI. You can plan a lot better. There's a lot of dimensions that go into planning. Planning is everything from like, did the road close as the truck was like getting in with the blueberries, and then the blueberries all like half quarter of the truck molded while they were waiting, like to like the weather. The farm have a high yield crop. Did the farm get an attack of like powdery mildew? Like you just like, that's like planning is truly like, where did the supply come from, especially in fresh and produce. It's a bit more stable in sort of center shelf, because that's all
right.
But not wholly, because there is like still like stuff has expiration dates. Like things can go wrong, unexpected things can go wrong in the supply chain. But there's a lot that goes into planning of it, and technology is getting better at like interconnecting those different systems from sort of, they call it like seed to truck or seed to shelf. That's one piece of it that's going to make it a lot sharper. It will also make it sharper in terms of predicting consumer trends. There aren't a lot of consumer demand trends that are like forecasters that are out there that like connects when something on TikTok blows up to then tell your ordering system to do XYZ. Like, I imagine we will exist in a world where we will see like better hype planning cycles based off of like how quickly a store can adjust on some of that. It's a lot tighter in Asia, because Asia is like way more interconnected, and it's like sort of like total tech available in terms of like what's trending and how does that find itself then on the shelf. But that's one piece of it that's going to get us to zero waste. The other piece of it will be, I mean, it'll come down to like the end of life side of things, like how, like whether it's like partnering with folks like Flash Food like us, or how a grocery store, runs its own, call it discount program, or continues to work with the banks to develop, the varying sort of distribution lines that are necessary. Like that's what will get us there. But it will never be like perfect zero, because at the end of the day, like we can't track the spore in the air that's going to land on the like Brussels sprout, and we can't tell if like Jordan is going to walk up to me, I'm going to walk up to the shelf of eggs and like knock them all over, and like you can't plan for those things. So there will always be some form of it, but there should always be tools that exist to make sure, because there always is someone that will buy like a carton of 8 eggs. And so I think it's important that grocery stores know like that audience is always there. And for us, like Flash Food, we're selling like 70% or more of what goes on the platform. And that's like a business you're not paying for like Super Bowl advertising, but like if we can exist in that context and move huge volumes for a grocery store, it shows that like the demand exists, right? And I think that's what's really interesting and powerful. It's also like why I stay in the space, because it's like you've got this is the perfect remedy for a marketplace. Like the demand is unfilled on either side. Honestly, like you can fulfill it when you connect them.
And you can be that connector. So You mentioned that you guys are publishing an impact report. What types of things are you measuring that people care about?
Year over year, we measure savings and offsets. So, and we also look at like offsets being like pounds diverted, savings being cost of
Hmm.
dollar to folks. This year, we'll look at health a bit more. So, what we found because we are a fresh supplier, the hypothesis as it stands, and we'll hopefully prove it out. Every impact report, we like to study something a little bit. So, last year, we really studied the access point, like what is happening in food accessibility, like whether that's like lack of nutrition, whole plate. We sort of prompted the initial question with last impact report. This year we'll go a little bit further into health because what we've seen in our data is because we do have like really great meat or dairy or produce, we become the sort of at some points like the start of the health journey for a lot of folks. Because I think people historically like nutrition being like a huge part of it. I mean, when you exist in fresh, you exist at the forefront of like all the good stuff that's supposed to go on your like FDA recommended plate, not triangle
Hmm.
now. So we see people experimenting a lot more with healthy foods. We see that
Hmm.
find way into recipes more for like families. And we wanted to really explore this year when you start to actually get into that like access point where food is affordable, like how does health change for someone?
How can you tell that people are experimenting, or how is that something that you're tracking?
We hear it. We hear it from folks. Like that was like the first time I had a dragon fruit or the like,
Okay.
like I was able to like feed my family, I got a bunch of meat from Flash Food and I was able to like make a stew or a chili and like my family of 5 ate like super, super well, like
Mm.
really like beans and fresh meat and like I got all the produce and I put that in there. Like that wouldn't have happened that week had that have not. And food, as like we all know, is sort of it's the gateway to a lot of things like healthy, well-fed kids like perform better in school and athletics, like stress is like when the cost of food is removed from sort of a family's life, like the stress of providing is absolved. And so I think we know that to be a huge part of the health equation. And that's something that
Mm.
we're curious to dig into just because of the nature of what we saw on the platform is like sitting at that sort of junction.
Yeah, it's an interesting way to think about it. Just having fresh produce be more accessible, people are trying new things, and also just buying bigger volumes than what they normally would. So if Flash Food succeeds, how will grocery shopping and maybe even how brands think about sustainability be different in 10 years?
I think that we will be one of the first to sort of prove out the thesis of the perfect purpose and profit brands being the brands to stay true. I think that would be one of the really true outcomes of it. We haven't seen someone like stick the landing and like hang around and keep the movement going. And I think, like I said, the other thing that we win on is like I hope that we get waste like knocked down by 50%. Like I genuinely hope we get to 0%. I'm like, if we do it, like we see the meaningful impact.
Is there anything that you're excited about for Flash Food?
We have a lot of launches coming up. So we're going to be in a lot more places this year. And I know
Mm.
that's been a huge thing for a lot of folks over the years who've like downloaded us and been like, not in my area. And we are doing our
Mm.
darndest in like this year and the next year to make sure that we are available in everyone's area. So that's something to stay tuned for. I think people that download the app, sort of my promise to you is like, don't delete it yet. Like, keep it so that you know within the next like month or two, or stay on the email list because we're coming to your area.
Mhm. So that's really exciting.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Jordan, for speaking with me today. It's been really great hearing more about your experience working in the purpose-driven brand space and how you're combining that with business. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a great one.